Shabbat Shalom. Charlie, receive all those hugs. Take them in. Wow, you did a really beautiful job chanting and leading prayer, and your Devar Torah is memorable, and not just for that penultimate line. And you know, Charlie, everything you did this morning and the way you did it is even more profound, because today is the first yahrzeit of one of Judaism's greatest minds and souls, Rabbi David Ellenson. Rabbi Ellenson, Dr. Ellenson, was the president of our Reformed Seminary, Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. He was considered one of the greatest Torah scholars of his generation, and arguably one of the greatest of any generation. If David were one of the angels in Jacob's dream, we might imagine him as one of the angels climbing down the ladder, because he was so gifted at bringing the wonders of heaven to us here on earth. But really, he would be one of the angels climbing up, because before everything else, he was a mensch, and he brought the best of humanity wherever he went. We desperately need him here, but he is still emanating goodness as he teaches Torah to the generations of sages who came before him. And Charlie, you are among those who are his living legacy, sharing Torah with the world. I miss him very deeply and personally as a student and colleague and friend, and I am telling you that you brought me great comfort and hope on what was feeling like a very sad day. So thank you. I come to the text this morning in gratitude for you both. So, I don't know about all your sleeping patterns, but I don't know how Jacob does it. After colluding with his mom, lying to his dad, stealing from his brother, he runs away from the mess that he has created. He lies his head on a stone pillow in the middle of the hard desert ground, and he falls asleep right away. He's not tossing, he's not turning, he's not plagued by nightmares. Instead, he's gifted with a very good night's sleep and has what may be the most incredible dream in recorded history. As we have heard, he sees angels climbing up and down a ladder, stretching from earth to heaven, and better yet, God appears and bestows on him this extraordinary blessing of a legacy extending through time and space, one that will bring goodness and light to all. And God promises Jacob that wherever he goes, God will be right there with him, keeping him safe. Jacob awakens from this pivotal experience with an entirely new lens on life. Filled with awe and wonder, he realizes that nothing is different, but that everything has changed. God was in this place, and I had no idea. What Jacob did next, though, really annoys me. We read, Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had placed at his head, and he set it as a monument, and he poured oil over its top. Jacob then made a vow. If God will be with me and guards me on this path that I am going, and if God gives me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and if I return in peace to my father's house, and Adonai will be my God, then this stone which I have set as a monument will become a house of God, and all that you give God, I will surely give a tenth to you. Charlie, do you know what chutzpah is? Like, is that a word that you and your friends use? It's a great word. It sounds like what it means. It's like nerve, like chutzpah, shamelessness. So, like, this story is textbook chutzpah. Jacob could have consecrated that altar of stones by simply saying, thank you, or even, wow. But instead, he makes a conditional prayer to God. If you take care of me, if you make sure I have food and clothing and protection, then I'll come back here and show you gratitude. Well, if anyone else here is annoyed by that like I am, I want you to know we're in good company. Because for centuries, scholars have been struggling with Jacob demanding a spiritual quid pro quo from God. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Jacob seems to forget that God does not have a back. For example, the great 11th century French commentator Rashi tries to save Jacob's reputation by explaining that what seems like arrogance is actually humility. Jacob says if, out of concern that he might continue his pattern of misbehavior, and then will no longer deserve the blessings that God promised him. He doesn't want to take God's blessings for granted, Rashi says. I mean, it's Rashi, so very clever, very creative, but it strays pretty far from the simple meaning of the text. Then we have Nachmanides, the famous 13th century sage from Spain, who goes even further than Rashi. He tries to prevent Jacob from looking like a brat by turning the text completely on its head, and he makes this prayer seem like an expression of Jacob's complete faith in God, using some fancy linguistic gymnastics, which I won't bore you with. It's all rooted in biblical Hebrew. Nachmanides explains that every time we hear if in the text, it actually means when. So in other words, according to Nachmanides, Jacob is confirming that in the future, when all of his needs are met, when he is rested and nourished and clothed appropriately and safely back from his journey, then, meaning at that time, he will be well enough to return to this altar of stones he has constructed and to perform a ritual of gratitude. Also very clever. Completely turns the text upside down to get there, though. The interpretation that is most satisfying to me, the one that cracked open the text and my heart, comes from a lesser known but equally wise 13th century French rabbi known as Chizkuni. He starts by reminding us that vows in general are not a good idea ever with anyone, and you definitely do not want to pull God into vows. But then instead of criticizing Jacob, he says that this is not in the Torah to show us that Jacob was making yet another mistake. It is there to help us understand just how frightened Jacob was. Chizkuni doesn't try to justify Jacob's actions. He doesn't try to heroicize him. He doesn't gloss over the immoral behavior which got Jacob into this mess in the first place. He simply relates to Jacob, empathizing with his fear. Because what we can all know with certainty is that Chizkuni has known that kind of fear, as most, if not all of us, have. However Jacob got to be where he is right now in this moment, he is alone in the desert and he is scared. He is likely alone for the very first time in his life. This homebody who preferred the containment of the kitchen to the expanse of the surrounding fields, this boy who was so deeply bonded to his mother and followed her every directive, he was suddenly miles away in a strange place. There was no one to provide Jacob with food or comfort, no one to tell him what to do or reassure him that everything would be okay. Yes, God did bless him in a vision, but this was Jacob's first experience with God. Suddenly, he was stepping into his future, into his scary, unknown future without his usual safety nets. No wonder Chizkuni described Jacob as feeling desperate. Again, I'm sure that most of us, if not all of us, have experienced moments of despair, that have led us to say and do things that otherwise we wouldn't. Some of us may have bargained with God in a way similar to Jacob. If I pass this test, then I'll never cheat again. If this surgery is successful, then I will start volunteering. Or maybe our chutzpah prayers aren't conditional. Maybe we have blamed God or cursed God. We didn't get the job. The cancer came back. Our loved ones are still missing, and we don't know if they are alive or dead. Bombs are exploding all around us, and our children are hungry. There is plenty of reason for fear and despair. Hizkuni understands this, and he humanizes Jacob, and in doing so, he humanizes us. He helps us leave judgment behind and hear Jacob's prayer as a heartfelt cry. If we can feel that empathy for Jacob because it resonates within us, then hopefully we can hear it for other people whose words and actions might disturb us. Perhaps we can pause and just think, wow, they must really be scared. They must really be feeling desperate. This reminds me of something I learned from a hero of mine, Padraig Ó Tuama, an Irish poet, who once said, "My interest in prayer is where it comes from, not where it's going. The heart, rather than God." In other words, prayer is really about the prayer. We, the human beings who offer prayer, not God who receives the prayer. Well, Hizkuni, I think, would agree. That's what he is basically saying too. And he has something else to add. He tells us that God prefers that Jacob speak to him in this way from the raw and pained place of his truth than not reach out to him at all. God invites all the words of our mouths, all the meditations of our hearts. They are our honest feeling, and when we share those feelings, when we express them, they are a gift. It is a gift for us to share, and it is a gift for God to receive. I'm a rabbi, and I know that prayer can feel awkward or stilted, uncomfortable, sometimes primitive. Sometimes we resist prayer because we don't believe in God, or we don't have an understanding of how our relationship works, or what happens with prayer, and what does it all mean, and is God hearing it anyway, and does anything change? Some of us might be put off by Hebrew or by the language in our prayer book. Some of us might have a hard time finding the words that we want to offer. That gives voice to what we're feeling. But what we know from our human relationships is true here too, which is that withholding feelings is really almost never a better option than communicating them in some way, whatever that way is, as long as it's honest. So instead of worrying about the mechanics of prayer, instead of giving Jacob a hard time for doing what sounded really chutzpah, let's allow ourselves the freedom to own whatever is in our hearts and release it, whether we express ourselves through a deal, a plea, a gasp of amazement, a groan, or even the unformed fullness of silence. When we get caught up with thinking and doubting and reasoning, let's remember the wisdom of that Spanish 13th century rabbi and that 21st century Irish poet and focus on where the prayer comes from, we who are human, and not where it's going. In just a moment, we will continue with the Aleinu prayer, similar to Jacob's dream in that it envisions a better world that we can help bring to reality, one that is peaceful and whole, filled with greater empathy for ourselves and each other. Let's bring ourselves to that vision from whatever place we find ourselves in now, from whatever is in our heart, be it joy or grief or detachment or any mix of those or anything else. God is accepting of whatever it is we carry, so why shouldn't we be? I'd like to introduce the Aleinu with an intention for prayer written by Padre Gotuma. I think it speaks to Jacob's story and to our stories as well. Let us pick up the stones over which we stumble, friends, and build altars. Let us listen to the sound of breath in our bodies. Let us listen to the sounds of our own voices, of our own names, of our own fears. Let us name the harsh light and soft darkness that surrounds us. Let's claw ourselves out of the graves we've dug. Let's lick the earth from our fingers. Let's look up and out and around. The world is big and wide and wild and wonderful and wicked. And our lives are murky, magnificent, malleable, and full of meaning. Oremus, or using synagogue language, we might say, Baruch Hu, let us pray.